2024, an election year like no other. From the candidates to the issues, from voter integrity and analysis, we'll discuss debates, trends, patterns, election laws, and more. This is Vote 2024, Path to the Polls.
Praise from the left calls to resign from the right. House Speaker Mike Johnson brings about a major legislative victory in the House with aid for Ukraine and Israel. Question now is, will it cost him the gavel? His fate's hanging in the balance with calls for a coup. Ironically, it might be Democrats that come to his rescue. History being made with prosecutors presenting the first criminal case against a former president. And Donald Trump may finally be forced to face his alternative facts in court about the 2016 presidential election. And could the DeSantis family remain in the Florida governor's mansion even after Ron DeSantis' term runs out in 2027? A new poll suggests there's a lot of enthusiasm to see Casey DeSantis at Florida's helm. That said, there are a lot of provisions. I'm Bruce Hamilton. Welcome to Path to the Polls. We'll talk about those topics and more, offering some great perspective. I'm joined by News4Jax political analyst and head of the Jacksonville University Public Policy Institute, my friend Rick Mullaney. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate you being here.
Great to be with you.
So, Rick, let's start with the House Speaker. He made it clear he will not resign. You know that there's a broader question here. One pundit asked, did we just see the dam break in the House? Did we?
Bruce, I'm not so sure we saw the dam break. If we did, it was temporary. And what you did see on Saturday was something pretty stunning, because for months there had been this backlog on foreign aid. And on Saturday, we saw 4 big votes. One was on Ukraine, and this has been contentious. And this is a piece of a growing sort of isolationist wing of the Republican Party, and a vocal part of the Republican Party that was very opposed to this. And Mike Johnson, in the eyes of the Wall Street Journal and many, showed great courage and leadership in bringing this to a vote. So Ukraine on Saturday passed, and there will be a $60 billion aid package to Ukraine. The second was aid to Israel. That was far more bipartisan, although there was certainly some conversation about that, particularly on the left wing of the Democratic Party. Aid for Taiwan, and of course a vote on TikTok and having to sell TikTok or else it'll be banned within a year. So the dam, I think, temporarily opened up to let those 4 big issues in. But I think the dam is still back up, in part because there is a deep partisan divide between Republicans and Democrats. But there's also a divide among Republicans themselves. It is a highly fractured party. So if anyone believes that the dam is now broken and now that legislation will flow freely, I don't think so. But we should not miss the significance of last Saturday. Mike Johnson he himself went through an evolution to get there. It was procedural what he had to go through to get it to a vote. You saw a vote on 4 separate pieces of legislation. It now heads to the Senate where passage is expected.
I find it interesting that Marjorie Taylor Greene actually went home without bringing about a vote. So I'm not quite sure what's happening there. If she's going to back off, time's certainly going to tell. Now, the Speaker made it clear he feels like he did the right thing, as you said, and there are some institutionalist rank-and-file Republicans who are fed up with what they're calling their rambunctious colleagues. Among them is Representative Tom Cole of Oklahoma, and he said today's antagonism toward House leadership stems from a lack of respect for the institution and the wisdom of the institution. Speaking of the bomb throwers, he added, you know, you've got to grow up. You think Johnson keeps his post, and does this mark a new era in bipartisanship and Congress finally get some things done?
Well, Bruce, I'm going to go to the second question first because it's easier. The second part of that question is this a new era of bipartisanship? I don't think so. Is Congress going to start getting things done finally? I don't think so. I do think you did see some bipartisan votes on Saturday. And by the way, as you mentioned, if in fact Speaker Johnson is in jeopardy and it comes to a vote, it may be Democrats that rescue him to maintain his speakership. But the first part of your question, does he survive this? Be very clear, with the November election for the presidency and for the midterm elections, most Republicans, including President Trump, do not want to have the debacle that we saw last fall with the House Representative and with McCarthy, and so they do not want to see this happen. In the near term, I think there's a good chance that you see Mike Johnson survive. And by the near term, I'm talking about through the election. All bets are off, of course, past November. You don't know who will be in the majority in the House and what his chances would be there. But despite Marjorie Taylor Greene threatening, and despite having a couple colleagues with her, I don't think she quite has the votes to succeed just yet. So she's gone back to her district to listen to what they have to say. She's a bit of an outlier, although very loud. So in the end, in the near term, you could see him survive. I don't think this means an era of bipartisanship, unfortunately.
Well, one of the things that the Republicans have to be cognizant of is that they don't want to take a chance and have control of the House fall.
They certainly do not. And you see a dwindling margin for it was razor thin to begin with, and whatever's less than razor thin, they've got that now. It is very, very thin. And so they do not, as an institution, and you saw the Oklahoma representative talking about that, as an institution, they do not want to have to repeat. We forget, last fall when this happened with McCarthy, it was the first time in the history of the country, more than 235 years since the passage of the U.S. Constitution, did you have the ouster of a speaker. Here we are 6 months later, threatening the same thing because a faction is not happy with him bringing Ukraine to a vote and what he is and some other things that they're upset about. So I do think that in the end, he may be okay for the near term.
All right, the other big news is, for the first time in history, a former president in the midst of a criminal trial. We'll turn the page on that after we take a break. You're watching Path to the Polls. It's Path to the Polls. Rick Mullaney from the Jacksonville University Public Policy Institute. And his perspective here on the Trump criminal trial is going to be very interesting because he's a former federal prosecutor. So
state court prosecutor.
State prosecutor. He's got some fascinating insights here. So let's talk about the Trump business fraud criminal trial. In New York State, falsifying business records is normally a misdemeanor, but it can be demonstrated that the reason for falsification was for some other crime. It becomes a felony. And that's the case here because it's related to the 2016 presidential election. That said, it's my understanding that the prosecutors have two orders of business here, Rick.
A couple things, and let me add a third. The first, of course, in the fundamentals of their case, they're going to have to prove the falsification of these records. And they're going to prove it 34 times because there's 34 counts. And Donald Trump, when you hear this in defense, is going to say, of course, that he had nothing to do with how the records were kept, that was an accountant doing that. But for the prosecution, the first thing is to demonstrate that was billed as legal services, that those were actually falsified. As you pointed out, that's not enough by itself because the statute of limitations has run on that. That's a misdemeanor, falsification of records. So then they have a second thing to prove, and that is, as you just mentioned, that it was done with the purpose of concealing a crime. And this has been hotly debated because the question is, what's the crime? And here, from opening and statements, it appears that it's a federal crime, a federal elections violation. By the way, Bruce, this will be appealed, and this is the subject of much contention. Why is a state court prosecutor going after a federal federal election violation is one of the questions being asked. And by the way, this is the first time in the history of New York that the business records crime has been used with a federal election violation, but that's the second piece. But there's a third piece I'd mention. In opening statement yesterday, the prosecution said this was election fraud. And what they're trying to do is elevate the significance of this case. They're not going to call this the cover-up of an affair. They're not going to say that they covered up because he was afraid it would be bad for him in the election. It is about affecting the outcome of the 2016 election and that this was election fraud. So for the fundamentals of the prosecution, prove the falsification of the business records, prove that it was done with the purpose and intent of concealing a crime. And they're going to have to prove what that crime is.
And if you listen to the defense's opening statements, they said, look, this is all about bookkeeping. And if you talk about, altering an election, that's democracy. That's their argument.
Bruce, I think that altering democracy, they're laying the groundwork for a different argument that I'll mention in just a second. I think that the defense here is, number one, they're going to say that they didn't have an affair, but that's not going to be important. What they're going to argue is, it may be in the eyes of some jurors, but that's not what they're going to argue. The argument will be that the payment, which they're going to admit, they're going to say, yeah, we made a payment. It's a non-disclosure agreement, NDA. That happens all the time. The NDA is not a crime. It is also, and that would be a big part of their argument, and that President Trump did not have an intent to commit a crime. And by the way, the records was a record-keeping thing done by his organization, not him. But I think their overriding argument, and it's something you just mentioned, is they're laying the groundwork on this democracy argument to say, listen, and this is difficult in white-collar cases, even if everything they say is true, even if he had had an affair and we deny it, even if the proof of there is a non-disclosure agreement, and even if this record isn't accurate, there's no crime here. That's not election fraud. And I think that's the argument both at the trial court level and on appeal that you're going to see the Trump defense lawyers make. And by the way, that's very challenging on the defense when in white-collar crimes when the defense sort of admits or says that even everything they've proved doesn't matter. And that's going to be part of their argument.
And, I didn't put this in our notes, and I know I'm not going to throw you for a loop. Everybody thinks that the spotlight's just on Donald Trump. Spotlight's really on Michael Cohen, too. He's a big variable here for both the prosecution and defense in this case.
There's just no doubt about that. And you see Michael Cohen's making a lot of comments about Donald Trump. Donald Trump has responded in kind. That's what's got him in concern with this gag order issue. And he will be a big, big part of the case. And you can see in the opening statements yesterday, you want to take the wind out of the sails of the negative stuff relating to your witnesses, that the prosecution is going to do that with Michael Cohen. When he's on direct, they're going to admit that he's admitted to perjury. They're going to admit that he's been untruthful in the past.
He went to jail.
And he went to jail for it. And they're going to argue, but he's come clean and he's telling the truth now. On the defense side, they're going to go after many of these witnesses as not being credible. That includes Stormy Daniels, that includes Michael Cohen, and that includes some others.
Hope Hicks, who worked for Donald Trump. They're going to blast her.
Well, you're going to have to wait and see. Again, I think the primary argument in the end is going to be this influencing of the election and that this is a democracy, and that they will say that even if a lot of the prosecution's case is true, it doesn't mean that there was an intent to commit a crime or that a crime was committed. We'll have to see how it plays out.
We will. So let's not ignore another reality here. This is a politically fraught criminal case. Could a single Trump sympathizer cause a mistrial?
Any one of those jurors could cause a mistrial, and it's important to know the difference between New York and, for example, the state of Florida when it comes to the number of jurors. When I was a prosecutor, of course, there was only one case that we had that involved 12 jurors, and that was if it was a death penalty case. In civil practice, when I was at the general counsel's office, there was only one case that we had that was 12 jurors, and that was eminent domain cases, taking someone's property. So in Florida, if you're at risk of losing your life or your property, you get 12 jurors. Otherwise, it's 6. But in New York, this is 12 jurors, and that is a challenge for the prosecution because the verdict has to be unanimous. And as you just stated, all it would take would be one juror. They could be a Trump sympathizer, or they could be someone who, based on listening to the law and the facts, just doesn't agree. So that is one possibility, and certainly that is something that the defense team knows very, very well, that it takes one of those jurors for a potential mistrial.
And for Trump, could a mistrial be as good as an acquittal?
In my opinion, yes. It clearly could be if you were to ask the Trump team right now, can you sign up for a mistrial, would you take it? The answer would be yes. There would be the likelihood of having that tried again, I think, is remote. With John Edwards, who was the former vice presidential candidate on the Democratic side, who is alleged to have spent $900,000 in what we call hush money, a non-disclosure agreement, to a woman who he had gotten pregnant when he was running for office. He was actually acquitted on some counts, but there was a hung jury on the others, and they never went forward on the others in the case of John Edwards. A mistrial here, in effect, would be tantamount to a Trump victory.
So if there were a mistrial, the prosecution could call for a mistrial, but that would be a PR nightmare for them.
It really would. In the end, in theory, they could retry him on this case, but I really believe as a practical matter that wouldn't happen. So this trial will be it, one way or the other. Either there's going to be a conviction, an acquittal, or it could be a hung jury. But I suspect, now we've seen history defied in so many ways recently, but I suspect this will be the trial.
How about Donald Trump's demeanor during this trial? I know that in the courtroom before, Donald Trump has taken on Judge Marchand. Because this is a criminal trial, do you think he's going to be more laid back? He has been so far.
Yes, I've thought that from the very beginning. A criminal trial is different. His civil case that he had before, and by the way, he should have learned the lesson that criticizing the judge and in that case, the Attorney General's office, really is not a great legal strategy, and it did not help him, and he got a big judgment against him, but that's a civil case. And when he's out on the stump, he's out, that's politics. Or he could be even talking, giving some other address. But in a criminal courtroom in which you're facing potential jail time, which is the offense for committing a crime, there's no minimum mandatory here, but it is a possibility. With that judge, it is a different venue, a different environment, and he needs to be successful in the courtroom. And that disruption is not helpful. So far, he has behaved differently, and I expect that to continue.
It really didn't take that long to go ahead and seat a jury here. Do you expect their deliberations to take a long time, or do you expect that they'll come back fairly quickly?
So hard to say. It's going to be a 6 to 8 week trial. I think we have to wait and see how this plays out. Just like the speculation over Donald Trump, whether will he testify or not. I think it's premature to have that conversation because I think that decision will be made at the end, not at the beginning. And if I'm the defense and if I can get out what he is trying to get out through other witnesses, then I certainly wouldn't want him on the witness stand. Donald Trump, however, I think would like to testify for lots of reasons. But in the end, he's got to, in this courtroom, following his lawyer's advice, I think there's a really good chance he won't, but it's premature to have that conversation, and it's way early to speculate about how early a jury, or how long a jury will be out.
Knowing that he's Donald Trump, knowing that he's prone to saying things that perhaps he shouldn't, if you were Donald Trump's attorney, and you know that he's chomping at the bit to get on the stand, would you advise him to testify?
I would not. I would tell him not to testify. I think there's too great of risk, and I would try to get whatever I wanted out. I would want to get it out through other witnesses. Now, remember, this is a lawyer's advice on a legal strategy. Politically, which is where Donald Trump tends to be, he's thinking about how does this play out politically. He may think that it might appear to be weak if he doesn't testify. He may feel for a lot of reasons it's to his political advantage. But remember, there's the courtroom and there's the court of public opinion. And Donald Trump cares about the legal outcome, but he's also running for president of the United States. And so he's going to have to weigh a lot of factors. But as his defense lawyer, the odds favor that they will advise him not to testify, but we'll see.
And there's no court action on Wednesdays. There's no court action on the weekend, so he can be on the campaign trail then.
On Wednesdays, last weekend, he was trying to do a rally in North Carolina and the weather interfered, but I expect him to be active on the weekends and active on Wednesdays. But he certainly has been vocal about the fact that this trial is sidelining him from being in the swing states. Part of his argument, when he walks out the door at the end of trial, he certainly has been very vocal. And part of that being vocal is that it's keeping him from campaigning.
When he's out on Wednesdays and out on the weekends, you think he'll say what he wants about what's going on with the trial?
He's under a gag order, and it depends on what it is. I mean, certainly there's a difference somewhat of a difference between him reposting or tweeting something that someone else has said, but he is subject to that gag order. I certainly think that he'll be wanting to talk about what he considers the big three, which is inflation, immigration, and crime, and contrasting himself with Joe Biden and trying to make the case. But he'll also be trying to discredit what's going on in broad terms in New York, and he can do some of that. But he's got to be very careful that he doesn't cross the line with that gag order, and that's not something that he's been real good at in the past.
All right, so let's talk about this. Could the DeSantis family, we're talking about Ron and Casey, find themselves back in the governor's mansion when Ron DeSantis terms out in 2027? And the reason I ask that is there was a poll that came out from FAU, and basically they said in a hypothetical matchup between Casey DeSantis and Matt Gaetz, there was a poll among Republicans, and Casey DeSantis got 38% of the support to Matt Gaetz's 16%. What do you think about that?
First thought is this is way out. Way out in times. Second of all, that's not the entire field. There's other people that'll be running. But third of all, I wouldn't miss the obvious message here, and I think it's true, is that Casey DeSantis is potentially very formidable. She was here at Channel 4. She is good in front of the camera. She's good interpersonally. She's been on the campaign trail. She knows how to raise money. So I certainly wouldn't underestimate her because she is very formidable. But on the other hand, I wouldn't be saying, do we need new draperies for her term just yet? I'd hold off a little bit. This is pretty early.
But I also think it speaks to the fact that the DeSantis family has a very high profile in the state, and that Casey DeSantis, is known for her profile.
Clearly so. And by the way, that would be, again, when you're making the list of advantages for her, that is one of the advantages. Name recognition, profile, she's well known. Plus, if you like what DeSantis is doing, and by the way, since he's dropped out of the presidential race, you can see that he's coming back a little bit in terms of favorability. If you like what he's doing, she might be a natural successor, her argument would be, to carry on sort of those DeSantis policies. And she did a tweet recently when she talked about coming to Florida and what that means. And so therefore, again, it's really early, but she's very formidable.
Yeah, we do have to take it with a grain of salt, and neither Casey nor Matt Gaetz has announced their intentions. It is way out, but I guess we're going to have to wait and see. Rick, always a pleasure.
Good being with you,
Appreciate
Bruce.
you being here. Remind you that this show airs again, streams again at 7 o'clock at night, or you can watch it on demand when you'd like on News4JAX YouTube channel, News4JAX Plus, and News4JAX.com. It's Path to the Polls. Appreciate your time.
See why every day more people are choosing News4JAX, Northeast Florida and South Georgia's #1 source for local news.